Well, hello. This is a long-awaited video. It took me a long time to finish this book, but I'm here, and today I want to talk to you about Cadillac Desert, which is a book about water in the West. And you might think, well, how interesting can that be? Marc Reisner wrote this many pages about it, so yeah, there's actually a lot to it, and a lot of the personalities and stories, so there is a lot here. So, Marc Reisner, the author, actually died in the year 2000. The original book was written in 1986 with revisions in 1993 and another revision in 2017 where more information gets added and more things get looked at. And yes, it is a book about water in the West. Marc Reisner was a journalist, and he put in an incredible amount of research, interviews, and travel to write this book. And it's a book that takes a long time to read. This isn't a book where you just sit down and like, oh, I need something light to read before I go to sleep tonight. No. It's a very detailed and complex book. And so the autofocus on the camera failed until quite a lot later in the video. And I've already taken my set down. So we're just going to fill in the missing part here on the couch with the camera on my laptop. But anyway, the book. So I care because I'm taking the time to do this. This is a good book. The book begins by looking at the American West as it was. There was a tribe he talks about that had attempted irrigation, but mostly the natives that lived there were few and far between, and they'd come through the area to hunt, but for the most part, they didn't live there. They wouldn't stay. Why? Because it's not really a hospitable land. Compare the West, the American West, to the East Coast with its regular rain and temperate climate. You can see a bit of a difference there. As an example, my parents don't regularly water their garden. I have a drip tape system. Now, they live on the East Coast. I live here in North Dakota. I get an average of 17 inches of rain per year. They get an average of 44 inches of rain per year. Now, I am in an area that's barely suitable for agriculture, and you don't find irrigation here. The crops this year were terrible because they didn't have enough water and it was a drought year. But just wait. Although we don't have irrigation here, irrigation is going to play into this story. So the first explorers of the area discovered a harsh, unforgiving land. Think of people like Lewis and Clark, John Powell, John Muir, who I've got a book of his I need to read here soon. And this book especially follows John Powell. His adventures are no longer possible. The wild, untamed Colorado River that he traveled down no longer exists. It's dammed up. You can't see many of the canyons that he saw. The western U.S. is very dry and rugged, and when rains come, they often come quickly and in large amounts that cause flooding. I have a pen that appeared on Pens in Use this week. This is a terrible camera to show it, but it's modeled after Antelope Canyon. You don't just hike back to Antelope Canyon. You have to get a guide because one of the concerns is the flash flooding that's possible there. This isn't a useful way to supply water for agriculture. It's got to be more spread out, and you don't have that. The U.S. spent a fortune buying a large chunk of the West through the Louisiana Purchase, and there is definitely some history over how we collected the Southwest United States. Probably a topic for another book because he doesn't really delve into it in this one. And we have the Rocky Mountains casting a large shadow, a rain shadow, over the West. Their western side gets a lot of Pacific Ocean moisture. The east side, not so much. And that's why Oregon and Washington have rainforests on their coasts and deserts in the east. And that plays out in politics and population. The coast of these states are heavily populated and very politically liberal. The other ends are sparsely populated and very conservative. In fact, some counties in the eastern ends of these two states are have movements to secede from their state and join up with Idaho. That's something that, by the way, was not mentioned in the book, because I don't know if these movements didn't exist when he was writing it or he just didn't care, but, there it is. My own state, North Dakota, gets wetter as you move east. Because you're getting further out from under the rain shadow. I lived in a town in the middle of the state, and yeah, I had to water my garden, but it wasn't to the level that I needed an irrigation system like I have here in the western end of the state. I live in the semi-arid west. So as you explore the west, you discover fun things, like heavily forested Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff, Arizona is located on a mountain, and it's surrounded by desert. I wish when I visited Flagstaff, how long ago has it been? It's been a long time. I wish I'd had a dash cam back then, because I wish I could have just captured the transition from the desert to forest as you climbed up to Flagstaff. It was just amazing. Around here you kind of see the same thing. Ekalaka, Montana is a forested island surrounded by prairie. But the American West had the misfortune to be located beside a growing nation. And this growing nation did land giveaways and other things to bring people to the West. Go west, young man! The rain will follow the plow, and all that. And what were these settlers to do for water? Some got lucky. Others quickly discovered, gotta sell out. And, how do you farm without water? Fun fact around here, a lot of the farms in this area emptied out during the Dust Bowl, which, for those of you not familiar with U.S. history, that was a multi-year drought in the 1930s that caused a lot of the Great Plains states to empty out because the drought was just so extreme. Some people discovered that they had power. They had the ability to dam up a water supply and deny it to others. So anyway, getting back to Arizona, I was down there because my brother was getting married, and I'll protect his privacy and not talk about where he was married. We'll just say a desert town in Arizona. But I used it as the chance to explore part of the country I'd always wanted to see but never had. And what I remember clearly is my second night out. My first night I stayed somewhere in Wyoming. Second night I stayed in a town city called Fruita, Colorado, which ironically I know about 6 people who've moved from this town to Fruita, Colorado, but side note. But what struck me is the fields were circular. And it took me a minute all the fields around here are rectangles. It took me a minute to figure out why. Because they irrigate. So, the agriculture of the West largely depends on irrigation. If we cut off the water supply, what do? Well, I don't have an answer for that because, you're SOL. I'm not going to translate that. So, anyway, the book then turns to stories of various dams and diversions. We get the seedy story of how Los Angeles went from being a small, dry village to being the metropolis it is today. Well, how? By stealing water. Oh, but we didn't steal it. But it's a very underhanded, gross story. You hear about Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles? There really was a Mulholland. He was quite a guy, and he had quite a way of finding water for his growing city. if you've ever seen the movie Chinatown starring Jack Nicholson, that gets into water rights. This is not a good story. Los Angeles is pulling water from hundreds of miles away to supply its growing population. And what do? You've got the city, you've got these people, you're growing, and the philosophy is if you're not growing, you're failing. So they had to find water from somewhere. There's the tale of the Owens Valley, which sounds a lot like paradise. They didn't get much rain in the Owens Valley, but they had a river flowing freely through it thanks to the mountains around it. And the whole story of how Los Angeles grabbed up their water and emptied out all the ranches and farms in Owens Valley, and also Los Angeles could have the water. We learn about how the Central Valley became an agricultural hotspot, Central Valley of California. And it shouldn't be. Back when I used to teach biology, one of the things I'd talk about when we're doing evolution is the salamander populations. They'd live in the mountains around the Central Valley. They're ring species. But they weren't in the Central Valley because it was too dry for them. So they evolved, and the ones in the northern end of the valley and the southern end of the valley had evolved differently to become different species. Just a interesting study. But it illustrates how dry the Central Valley naturally is. But we're farming it. I've got avocados in my kitchen right now from Central Valley. We learn how politicians just rolled over actual experts in the field. We get to see the political dealings. You get to find out how Jimmy Carter, despite his best intentions to, let's slow down this dam building thing, he basically got steamrolled and worked over by these politicians who are bound and determined they're going to build their dams. So the U.S. government wanted to develop the West. Politicians wanted to build dams. The U.S. government did everything it could to drag people into this inhospitable land. And the question is it sustainable? And at what cost? Drought years, like we are going through right now, are a problem. I have some links to videos down below. There's a gentleman, RV Traveler. Anyway, I've linked a couple of his videos. He's visited a few spots in the West, and they show how low the water has gotten. And even if we're not getting low, like the Colorado River, naturally was a very silty river, so all these dams are filling up with silt. So eventually the water's just going to be spilling over the top because the whole dam is filled up with silt behind it. And when I talk cost, the birds and the fish, we've totally changed those ecosystems because we have to have that water. And yeah, he does point out that these dams built during the Great Depression with low-wage workers may have helped us win the Second World War because they gave us so much energy resources that the Japanese didn't have, but still. But anyway, the drought years are a problem. When you have a drought, you still got to grow the crops, so you use groundwater. Well, you're developing a problem with over-extracting that groundwater. He talks a little bit about California, but he also talks about the Ogallala Reservoir, which is an underground aquifer through the whole Midwest. It starts, the northern end is in South Dakota, goes through Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, a little bit into some of the neighboring states, over into New Mexico a tiny bit. But this is water that was deposited over thousands of years, dating back to the Ice Age, and it's being extracted in just a few short years to grow crops quickly. And you're seeing land subsiding as the water gets taken out, and there's nothing filling in those spaces, so the land kind of collapses on top of it. And we're trying to grow crops that don't naturally grow in these areas through irrigation. And how sustainable is that? Well, it's not, because when you run out of water in that underground aquifer, that's it. Where are you going to replace it from? So there's a lot to this whole topic. It's not just surface water, it's underground water. And we need to build a civilization that is sustainable for the long term. And can we do that with this borrowed water? This book gets into a lot of different discussions of water rights. It gets into pointing out that some of these water rights are for water that doesn't even exist, because it was all this was based on best possible projections of water availability, which was not reality. The book talks about dam failures. It talks about the theft of land. One of the tales I found really compelling, in fact, I'm going to show you a picture here, was about the tale of the Garrison Dam here in North Dakota. At one time, it was the largest earthen dam in the world. I believe China has passed it now, but they dammed up the Missouri River in Garrison, and then again down in South Dakota, near Pierce, South Dakota. Now, interestingly, there were a lot of native tribes living along the Missouri River here in North Dakota. They had been friendly and helpful to Lewis and Clark during the whole the wars that we had, stealing land from the people who actually lived here. They were actually pretty neutral and friendly to the U.S. government. They were never a problem. So what do? Hey guys, we're going to flood your land. Get out. And it is a very, very compelling story, and it's just kind of a shocking betrayal. And their land was stolen to make a dam, and everybody got moved to a place called Newtown. Get it? It's a new town. All you people that had your nice little farms and ranches along the river, you get to live in this crap hole town. And it definitely is a story that deserves its own video, but I felt there are pictures in this book, and this was a picture I felt needs to be in this video. And of course, I didn't bookmark it. But you can see the emotion. This guy here, he's not happy about this. The caption, put me back in focus now. The caption says, George Gillette, chairman of the Fort Berthold Indian Tribe Business Council, weeps as he watches Secretary of the Interior J.A. Krug sign a contract whereby the tribe sells 155,000 acres of its reservation's best land in North Dakota to the government for the Garrison Dam and Reservoir project on May 20th, 1948. Gillette said of the sale, the members of the tribal council signed the contract with heavy hearts. Right now, the future does not look good to us. Yeah, we just took the land out from under them because we wanted a dam. So I want to, my big focus as far as research projects is on the Great Sioux War, but that's definitely a topic I want to revisit. I'd like to visit. I've talked about doing some videos on the different reservations in the state, and that's one of the central stories for that reservation. So it's a very human tale. You read about all the personalities and you just kind of wonder, how could things have turned out differently with different people? And it has a lot of warning about the future. How do we handle the future as the West runs out of water? That's scary. What do we do, with irrigation as agricultural land starts to fill up with salt? You can read in the book about agricultural land that's out of service now because it's too salty to use thanks to irrigation. Why are the oceans salty? Because all these runoff washes the salt out of the land and is built up in the oceans. When we keep the water on the land, we start to make the land salty. And the author Marc Reisner suggests that that's why some of the cultures that have relied on irrigation failed, because the salt built up in their land. What is the future of this civilization we built if there's no water? Now, there are signs of hope. We're starting to recognize the value of wild places. People have started to become aware of the need for water conservation. There's a lot more attempt to raise crops that are more native to the areas. You see in California where people are ripping out lawns and putting in proper desert landscaping. I don't want to be specific where in Arizona, but my sister-in-law's mother lives in a house with desert landscaping, not a nice lawn. And, that kind of thing is part of what's necessary. We may say we love the desert, but we say that from the comfort of our air-conditioned house, our air-conditioned car, our readily available drinking water, not actually trying to make a living in the desert. So, I think when the book was originally written, he saw no hope. You can see in his 99 revision. Let me just double check here. 1993 revision. He was starting to talk more about conservation. We do have conservation groups that are helping to preserve wild areas. And the 2017 edition just gives a few more signs of hope and a few more places where, we didn't learn the lessons. So I don't know what the future is really in these areas. I am not an expert on it. I knew back then that there was something wrong when we had all these round fields. But I had no idea how fragile the West is and how much it really depends on these dams. Really monstrous diversions of water. And you have millions of people living in these areas. And what happens if part of it fails? Well, a dam fails. Aqueduct fails. Or, as we're experiencing right now, you get multiple years of drought, which, with climate change is going to become more and more of a thing. Are we going to be fighting over water? Will we have examples like in this book where armed troops are sent to grab water? I honestly think if we ever have another world war, it's going to be fought maybe over oil, but more likely it's going to be fought over water. And so, very educational book, and really gives you a good perspective of the West and how it was won. And all these rugged individualists depending on government water and government dams. So it's a very interesting book, very thought-provoking. And this review was a long time coming because I needed to think, and at the end of this review, and I still don't think I did the book justice. Definitely one to reread, but not a quick read. This is a very slow read, but one that's very much worth reading. So I'm going to read some light stuff the next couple of weeks before I dive into another heavy book. But I would encourage you, if you're interested in water in the West, or you're interested in how the West was won, water's a big piece of it, so I'd encourage you to read this book. So thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.